I was heavily influenced by these artists right in the beginning when I made a transition from the representational work to the abstract work. And so, but the focus on this work has to do with its own physicalities, how the material flows and evolves. It's its own, like the material as agent. I wanted to talk about this paper because the paper was very different than any other papers which use normally the watercolors and other type of paper. These papers actually is called shrimp paper. The common name is the Chinese painting paper, which is made out of the sandalwood, the bark of sandalwood. It's been, these papers available since almost late stone, almost 1,000 years. And so the main difference is that every trace, every ink you apply on, it will record every layers. So almost have this kind of translucent qualities. Then also the water be able to carry all the media, ink or which is the soot based, and then also the acrylic. It can actually penetrate the paper. So not only on the surface, but it's also in the other side. So part of the idea I was interested is not so much on the way of how hand gesture paint, but actually let material form on its own. And so it's sort of typography, but at the same time it's to engage with sort of abstract meanings in terms of light and space, and then also the textures, the tangibility of the surface. What also I am very interested because of the how material that translates its own geometries. It's kind of a new way, very much in reminiscent to the nature of its own, like a fractal geometries and how material evolves. And so this painting is in a series of 4 pieces, which is in the same series as a sort of idea of mapping the way that normally I work on the floor. So have the whole structural setting on the floor, which paper was actually casted from what's underneath of the floor. So these material which penetrates the paper and how it's formed from the back. So I often work in the front and the back, and once done, actually all pieces actually has its own sort of own sort of lines and also the depth and the space. And so it's rather than seen as a structural, and I would rather see it as kind of sort of tangible geometry on the surface. And the video work is that it's shown that how that flow of fluxes of the media and material in the waters and forms the form this sort of dynamic sort of orders, so that use the video, which is the beginning of this video, is use the ink and how ink that start to flow and how it change, which also ink has its. You will see that in some of the footage in here. It's a non-narrative. But it's all sort of taking part of the sort of land formations and how water creates the sediment and how water flows and how the energy of water evolves. As you see that how the ink behaviors, it's almost the kind of like a living bacteria grows and it has its own energy, forms its own sort of abstract language.
So when you did this, to understand, you said you laid it on the floor. Did you put something under it first that was moist? Like ice or water or something that it would then absorb?
There is the layers of the sheet underneath. Sometimes I use paper, sometimes a plastic sheet.
Okay.
Just for the protecting the floor.
Okay.
But often I do like having water has a sit as forming. And it's sort of time-based and forming its own basis.
The black that I see on this was put on from the top. so to speak.
Yes, all the application applies on the surface, and then it actually absorbs and then penetrates to underneath. And then what happened was, and these are both sort of ink and acrylic, and it actually pushes and moves. This is how that is bleached through that.
Do you have any, through your experience, do you have some idea of controlling it?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, because it's structurally so.
Do you block
Right.
it, or do you block the flow?
Well, it's actually, I do the knowing how much apply and what we're foreseeing. But its main idea is that not actually myself as part of the protagonist, and rather actually work with what happened of its own, and you facilitates that. And of course, there's idea of wanting to engage with light, as I'm saying, engaging with this the new meaning of the geometries, not only that from the form itself, but also how material form its own fractals and structures.
Were these compiled on each other, or were they individual? I mean, in other words, that it would flow down through it into different ones, so you almost have a organic
It happens.
distilling.
Yeah, it happens naturally, and I think I only would know I can foresee that, anticipate what might happen. But in terms of what all the details, it's like any abstract paintings. You work as work is evolved.
But each one was done separately. You didn't layer 4 papers on top of one another.
Oh no, it's a separate. I actually worked them simultaneously. Yeah, as a whole field.
Separate but simultaneous.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you said sometimes you had things absorbed from the bottom, so then did you flip the paper over?
But once it's dry, I flipped over and sometimes work on the back in both ways.
And that comes through, of course, so when you do it from
Exactly. Yeah. So it's sort of more away from what actually the issue of painting dealing with in terms of the brush stroke and the compositions. And I think rather the reason I worked on the floor all the way long is I usually work 4 directions. I don't work on 1 directions. So it's not in orientation wise. It's more as a sort of living field and what material can be sort of interpreted as a way of seeing the paintings.
Do you use traditional means to apply it, or have you developed some of your own?
This is the way how I develop my own in terms of using acrylic media and to actually mix ink and then have this.
Ink brushes or pouring or other means to apply the paint?
I do use a brush that I made on my own. It's the wider brush, but it's not so much emphasized on brush work. So the other things that it's very different the way when I brought up in training and painted in a traditional style in early days, which you very much is about you asking what still engagement in a traditional way. I think mentally in a way of seeing this media, especially ink flow, how the water carries has its own energies, or the way of how define the space, I think is very much in part of from the traditional Chinese notion in terms of dealing with the cosmologies and how water flows and carries the subtlety of the space. But to me, that I also emphasize one of the materialities. As a frontal, it's more imposed rather than sort of it's more in a way the opposite that absorbs. And part of the reason it's engaging that I wanted to bring that paper totally transformed to the other kind of layers and elastic sort of materials that if you look at the Chinese traditional paintings, that it's always readable, that you don't need to look at whole pieces. You could actually cut into the sections and to read through. And a lot of time the negative space is something that's very symbolic. It actually has to do a lot more with the meaning of literatures and poetries, this entire combination. As a painter, which is cultivated with these entire combinations. But for me, that kind of space is gone. For me, that space is It's the void space is the substance, is the material. It's something that is like like a light in space. I was talking about light is actually particles, and the things that you can actually really being so your whole perception it will be actually directly engaged.
Is your background the traditional kind of calligraphy and ink work, or did you start right out with your own ideas, or was your background starting out with the traditional calligraphy?
This material is reflecting my background, which is I never actually abandoned traditional medium in terms of ink and shunt paper, the Chinese painting papers. So yes, I trained at the beginning as a calligraphers because that's how you have to understand way of using your brush and your body coordinations. But that applies to the entire formulation of what the traditional method of way doing the nature, tree, mountain, rocks, and how the way we depicts. But from that point on, I was actually more interested in how the way of the literati painters in China, how they foresee the natures, and versus how the contemporary Western artist and the Western art, how it actually interpreted and from the piece, you see from the Renaissance, from the early days, and compared to the Mondrian, there's a huge differences.
Yeah.
And so this is so for me is that sort of material is actually applied. That's the way to sort of engage with the two set of the thinkings.
Have you ever done printmaking? It's like, I look at your paintings and they're spectacular, and I look at the video and then I think right in the middle there somewhere is printmaking.
I did some in the middle 90s, but that was more out of my drawings at a time, and so it wasn't so much in paintings. Yeah, I do actually consider to do some printmaking.
I just think your paintings are breathtaking.
Thank you.
You do work, the paper is dry when you're working with it.
A paper is dry and we lose. Actually, it's very fragile. Not a paper itself. Once it's wet, you cannot pick up. It will break.
Right, so you have to-
So,
is it
and-
available in the United States?
Yes, you can get from the art supply store. Particularly, it's actually if you look at the Chinese painting papers, they would have you were more familiar with the rice paper.
Yeah.
Because rice paper is very evenly, the fiber is very even, versus these are actually has a variation of the, and the fiber is much longer, and the weight actually is more alive once you actually apply in terms of saturations. And
You mentioned you work with ink and acrylic. So what role is the acrylic just the medium that you?
the acrylic is one sort of like almost opaque, and the water-based, but acrylic also can form kind of a really physical sheen, the layers.
So
And
it's
if
clear. So is it? You said it's opaque.
It's opaque. If you see it, you see the work on the side, you can also see the reflection.
Oh, I see.
You can see that kind of a build-up crease, but that is all form of its own.
Okay.
And while you were talking, we were looking at the Frankenthal, Frankenthal pieces. It's in a way sort of like taking how the liquid carries the
And then it gets soaked.
right? And there's fluidities and there's also positive densities, so have different depth. So she's actually exploring the language of materials, and so I'm sort of using a different media that
And then see the
reply in
relationship.
the notion that it has, as I mentioned, that this fractals and the way how multi-species, how it actually human or non-human, the way multi-species, how they communicate, how it grows, which you see in my video, which have this kind of same idea, same idea of sort of perceiving the things that in a different way. At least I want to try to explore.
Is there any, there's a lot of accidental, there's a fair amount of accidents that happen in here.
Right.
And is that something that you enjoy and like it? Or is there any spiritual quality of this? And I'm kind of going over into the airy-fairy, but you know what I mean? Is there the accidental spiritual kind of thing that happens to you that you like in
I don't, the work itself, I don't think so much of the spirituality is. I think it's a spiritual in the way every day I'm back to go to the studio and sort of engage in my activities. But I think it's the accident is in a way is you have directions and then how you want the accident to be happening. So it's more intentional.
When you say fractal and the interaction, so is it more that you're concentrated, I won't say on the molecular, but on a level in which we normally don't perceive, but taking it down to a level more like the interaction between the paper, the water, the ink, and how it spreads apart. So taking this into like another level to view the world or the environment.
Yeah, I'm always interested in things not coming out from a non-art rather than only from the art, in a sense. That's what sort of like I'm so interested in our video was starting engaging in these sort of human or more than human in terms of how the sort of multi-species on its own, the communication or the collaborations that we call it. And so I think to me, it's kind of interesting that away from the notion of sort of abstraction and goes to sort of further. And I obviously got inspiration from this media, which is by accident, how the ink saturates and penetrates through different layers of acrylic and forms its own sort of fractal, which is actually, it's not a coincidence. It's sort of really the same connection with how things are formed. So,
You said you discovered it by accident.
by accident, the meeting when I work in a large field of the acrylic with ink and how water it flows and fluxes, that caused all effect once it dry, and I see that happen. But that happening is only the way how in line with what I actually want to have work that presented.
Thank you. There's one part of all this that we didn't talk about, and that is the video that's actually in the projection room, which sort of is the brand new work that takes us away from really the concerns of the more formal issues of the drawings and the video. So I would ask you to spend some time when you're back in, just in the space looking at it, reading about it, and we'll talk about it at one of the subsequent trainings as well. But these 4 works will become part of the museum's collection. So it would think better that we spend some more time out here with these so you get to know them a bit better. Johnny, thank you so much. And we will see you tonight. We will see you tonight, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Good.